Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you so much for joining us for one of our talks today. Today, we're joined by the wonderful Mark O'Brien to talk all about his latest film, Blue Bayou, as well as his latest directorial effort with The Righteous. And I wanted to start by talking about Blue Bayou and the character that you're playing, because it's a film that really develops a lot of complexity and a lot of questions as well around all the characters. It's not looking to give you finite answers to anything. And I was interested in the experience you had when you first read the script and when you read those first few scenes with him, that you really started putting him in a box yourself, and then you got to see some of those layers and some of the evolution that he goes on as a character. And with that in mind, how did that then play into the way that you wanted to approach a lot of scenes and approach his arc and his journey as a character throughout the film?
Well, that's a great question because I think, especially nowadays, but then again, I guess all throughout time, you have certain preconceived notions of people, or depending on where they're from or what they do for a living and whatnot. So that's what I liked so much about the script, actually, is because it was a really intelligent take on certain people and what you think that they might be and who they really are. And it's always much more complex, and it's never just one straight thing. Like even Justin John's character in the film Antonio, like he's a victim of the system, but at the same time he's not perfect. And I think that that's important to explore because everybody has complexities to them, and the more complex they are, the more human they are, and actually the more relatable they are, as opposed to someone who's just in this side or that side. And the same thing for my character Ace. I mean, you start off, you know that this is a film about immigration, and you know it's a film about deportation and stuff like that, and then you read the role of the cop, and you're kind of like, okay, like let's see where this goes. And what I loved about it is that Justin made it very human, and it doesn't say anyone is like I said, like always doing the right thing or being altruistic or anything, but there are human stakes for almost everybody involved in the entire film. It's like there's really something on the line here, and they believe in something. And I think too, it's interesting. The more I thought about it as I was piecing it together, like you try not to be too objective about the character because you're going to play them. So, but you kind of can't help when you first read it because you are objective to it. Um, I thought it was interesting how for my character, it's like it made me really think about how if you're not part of the solution, you are part of the problem because you're not helping. And for my character, what he wants is very simple and very real and very human and understandable. He wants to be connected with his daughter, but at the same time, he really doesn't care at all what happens to Antonio, who's important to his daughter. So I think those are the things that get lost a lot. I find today, and that's what I really liked about the script is that there are a lot of byproducts of what you just want that I think a lot of us don't really think about. And I thought that was a really intelligent and human touch in the script. And it really, really touched me a lot.
And the script also really focuses a lot on the emotional journey and those emotional beats within the characters. And your character in particular, he is the ex of Alicia Vikander's character, Kathy. And whilst we don't know the details and the specifics of how long were they married for, how did they meet, what was the reason that they separated, what was the beginning of Ace not seeing his daughter very much and not being a huge central parental figure in his life, but now he wants to be. We don't know the background of so many details of him as a character, and yet we completely see all the emotional facets of all of those details being played out between the two of you. And so how was that an interesting journey in working with Alicia in the film and really figuring out the emotional connectivity, because they're in this place of antagonism and hurt where they haven't managed to move past their own personal emotions yet?
Yeah, well, that's interesting to me too, because this sounds really weird, but I don't always think a lot of actors would disagree with me on this, that you need an entire backstory to something before you start filming. I just don't believe that as a filmmaker as well. I don't always think it's completely necessary. I'm not saying that you have to not understand the character and not pay attention. I'll read the script hundreds of times and decide I need to get there and perform this to see how it takes shape. And you've done lots of other kind of work that actors do, which everyone is different. But I think what I actually really liked about it is that, Alicia and I talked about it, and Justin and I talked about it, what their previous relationship was. But he was like, I just think you weren't there and you weren't ready to be a dad. And I was like, that's it. Like, you know what I mean? And it doesn't need to be. And in 1986, we did this. It's like, it doesn't matter. And I'm a big proponent of that as an actor because I talk about this a lot, like on set with other actors, like when we're just, talking about our craft and everything. I just think it's really hard to make and I'm kind of going on a tangent here, but this is something I really believe in, that if you make some really strict decisions on your character and then you get to set, and the way they're shooting it and the props and the setting and the other actor and the other actor's performance and their wardrobe, all these things are what's making the film. And if you're stuck in this idea, I think it's going to be very difficult for you to change it. And the best actors can have an idea and then throw it away. And I like that as well. But with this, it wasn't the focus. And I think that's how it can hamstring you sometimes. If you focus too much on your backstory, it's like, but that's not the story you're telling. The first job I ever did was a mini series called Above and Beyond in Canada. It was about World War II. It was a really good mini series about how Newfoundland, where I'm from, we sent over so many aircraft to England, which helped win the war. And I had a pretty big supporting role in it. And I remember realizing that as we were shooting, it's like, it's not my part is to support this. It's not all about you. And I think that's kind of in cohesion with what I'm talking about. And that's why I like that Justin just left air there and we'll see how we perform it. Let's see what it is. Let's let it come to life in the work. And I think it really did. And I think it's like, and with those characters, with Antonio, with Kathy and myself, or Alicia's character, Kathy, like you understand that it just didn't work. Like, I don't think there was one big event. It just didn't work, which is very universal to everyone. And I really like that because that happens all the time. Like, it's very relatable.
Yeah. And I think also to that idea of really letting the scenes speak for themselves and letting them breathe their own air, that one of the things that Justin Chon does as a director is he really lets each specific scene kind of live with the pacing and the rhythm and the emotional beats that it needs for that specific moment. So if we take the moment where your character's in the grocery store and that there ends up being that confrontation moment, you know, there's a lot more kind of connective pacing in that. And then there's a lot of slower pace moments where he really allows the camera to just kind of step back and allow the characters to breathe on screen. And so what was the way in which he would work with you and the rest of the cast in really figuring out what is the emotional rhythm of what this particular scene needs to be and is telling us that it needs to be?
Well, what was great, it was different every scene, because every scene is like what you just said. Like in the grocery store, it's a bit more kinetic. And then at other times you just kind of leave it in a wide or whatever. Like there's a scene where I come by to the hospital with Alicia and we have this huge kind of argument and it's just plays in one and it works. It just worked. Like sometimes, you know, when you're done the scene, like I'm an actor who I like to kind of know what the coverage is going to be. I like to know how we're going to shoot it, not because I'm saving anything for a close up, but you can work in rhythm and in tandem with the camera crew and with everybody. And Justin, it just always made sense. Like everything we went to do, really, every scene just really made sense. He really just, I think it's also too, I also think it's really helpful when an actor is directed or a director is acted. I think both ways. It's very, very helpful because there's kind of an inexplicable thing that you just know when you got it. You know, when you're like, yeah, that's what I was going for. That's what we're going to do. And you might change it in editing. You might completely change it. But Justin's instinct for that is so strong. He's a very good actor. So as a director, it just is such a natural thing that pours out of him that I really like. There's something about like actors, like we're a particular breed of people. And I think it's when the director just gets it. They're like, I understand. I know that this is that, but can you just do this? And like, for lack of a better way of putting it. And I love that about him. He understands. And the emotion he was going for was very clear. And the story he was telling was very clear, which, as I'm sure you've heard many times, every actor wants. It's like, I know exactly what you're going for. And then you fall into the rhythm too. So then when you're doing some of the scenes and it's day 20 of shooting, you're like, yeah, I know. Like, you're like, I got it. We're all kind of feeling the tone together. And he's great at setting that tone and then keeping it consistent.
And with that particular sensibility and that clarity that he had in a lot of moments, that scene that I was bringing up before in the grocery store where there's a confrontation between your character and Justin's character, particularly, you know, precipitated by your partner, Danny, that's such a pivotal moment in the film because it really spurs so many of the narrative moments that come after that. And so was that something where Justin had a really clear idea going into that of what he wanted the different character beats to be? Because there's so many elements that with your character, like the fact that he stands off to the side at one moment, that tells us a lot about him and where he's at that moment, going back to what you were saying earlier about how sometimes by not doing something, you're part of the problem based on then where he physically stands in a room later in the movie. So did Justin have a really straightforward and clear idea going in, or was some of that scene workshopped because of the amount of intricacies in it?
I think he had a really clear idea going in, because when we got there, we had a clear idea going in. Like, to me, I'm just like, you told me my daughter was sick. She's not sick. How come I can't see her? That's it. And then as soon as Denny comes along, it's like, no, 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 go away, go away, go away. Like, I know what you're going to do. But this is why I like what I do for a living. It's complex. It's like, but I'm not standing up to him, am I? And I let the thing happen. So in a way, I'm just as guilty. So, and that's kind of a weird microcosm for the whole film, where it's like the bureaucracy, you just let it get out of control, and no one's stopping anyone from these rules that are kind of like arbitrary and completely heartless. So they're just like, oh, well, that's just the rule. Can't change it. Sorry. You know what I mean? It's like, whoa, whoa, wait. So you're aware of this thing, but no one's doing anything to stop it. So it kind of, in a way, the entire kind of message of the film is sort of encapsulated within that scene, because also, he becomes separated from his family in that scene. I mean, it's in the trailer. Like, all of the conflicts are right there. And I think that's great when a film can do that, when it's like, you can almost take a scene out of a movie and that exists as its own story, almost just in that scene. I kind of love that. And I think that's such a powerful scene in that way. And I mean, it sets off so much of the action as well. And you feel it. You just feel it.
And one of the things I also wanted to ask you about is there's the moment where your character realizes that Antonio has been part of stealing motorbikes, and so he knows that there's been illegal activity, and even though he's working in law enforcement, he doesn't say anything at work. But he still has separate moments with both Antonio and Kathy where he makes it very clear to them that he knows exactly what's going on. And there's almost like a slight sense of like him exerting a little bit of power in like, I
Yeah.
have the ability to hold this over you. And at the same time, there's also the possibility that some of it is because it's about his connection to his daughter, and that's his motivation behind a lot of things. And so how did you work with the different potential directions that could go in really figuring out what you wanted his reasoning to be for telling them and not doing something?
That's a really good point and good question, because um, I have every right to get him arrested. He broke the law. He's breaking the law, and he's breaking the law not in a way that he's directly helping his family. I mean, he is in the end, it's money, but he's stealing motorcycles. I mean, he's breaking the law, and I'm a police officer. So that's where it goes to show. It's like that. It's, for me, it was the complexity that there's a part two when I go to pick up my daughter at school, and then I'm like, I'm gonna pull the trigger on this thing any minute if you don't let me start seeing my daughter. And it's like, I love it when characters are right and wrong, and he's right and wrong. It's like, Antonio like is not doing the right thing here. I mean, and I'm going to use that in the right way. I should be doing it anyway, and that way I get to see my kid. But at the same time, it's like, it's just really heartless of him. He's not helping Antonio, who his daughter loves, and who Kathy loves. So uh, for me, it's always like, I like to approach every kind of character I play with with it's kind of, how do I put this? Kind of in a sense of like, there's, even in their certainty, there's a conflict. I love that. I love it when a character has that, so that it's like, I'm gonna do this thing, but I'm not entirely sure. I think when a character is certain in a movie, it should only happen once or twice. I think it's like the rest of the movie, it should be, I'm not 100% sure. Even if it's subconscious, even if it's like, it's very, very layered. I love that, because that's drama and that's conflict. And I think that's why you want to keep watching. And for me, approaching those scenes and this character in general is like, there's a constant conflict within. And maybe it's just, maybe I'm a very conflicted person personally. I don't know, but I'm drawn to that. I'm really drawn to that. I think when you're pushed and pulled in two different directions, um, uh, it's revealed of who you are as a human. I think like as a writer, I like to write a lot of things where people are confined together, because I think who you really are comes out when you're in a tight group with people, or you're isolated. I think, your true self is very much revealed. And I think that happens too when you're pushed and pulled in two different directions. It's like, what decision are you going to make? And without giving anything away, I think Ace is swayed in one direction by the end. And it wouldn't be as palpable if he was certain the whole way through.
And I mean, one of the other spaces where we see that internal conflict in a decision as well is when he shows up in the courtroom for Antonio. And again, it's that thing of he's saying it's for his daughter, but is it because he actually understands that he needs to be doing the right thing and supporting Antonio by that point, because supporting him is his way of supporting his daughter as well at the same time. And it also comes across that he's a character who at times can't necessarily express his specific intent and the emotion behind something as well. And so how did that give you a lot of, again, just like really broad scope and interesting spaces and layers to take moments like that in the film as well?
Well, it's like what you're saying, like like you can't express very well, and that's an interesting thing as an actor. I played a role I loved on a show called City on a Hill for a few years, and he was a very, very expressive character, but he was also hiding things all the time and kind of playing people. And then I kind of went into playing a few roles where people aren't as articulate. And I realize it's funny as an actor, actors are quite generally extroverted and quite generally articulate to some degree, or at least introspective on their feelings and stuff like that. And they internalize and they really think about things because they have to. That's your job, is to, am I motivated to do this? Why? Like, that's all you think about. But most people probably aren't like that. You know what I mean? Like, a lot of my friends aren't necessarily like that. So that's kind of the challenge. I mean, that's being an actor. You're trying to find someone else, what's true in them that you can connect to. And I like being able to play that because it's so different from my way of thinking. I'm normally very direct and kind of like sort of know what I want a lot of the times. And I think when you can't articulate something, it's more places for you to go. It gets in your head a little bit more. Like, for example, when you're doing a scene and you say, hey, I'll see you at the barbecue on Tuesday. I mean, he's like, I might as well get my cat to do it. I'm not like, you know what I mean? Like, those just, they don't have a lot of meat to them. But for like, even that scene just in the courtroom, there's so much behind that. There's so much weight behind it. And I think for me, approaching it, you have to just be as subjective as you can, because you're trying to get across an idea and all that kind of stuff. But if you get weighed down with that, then it might, you know what I mean? People can see you trying to communicate it. But if you're just thinking it, I mean, it's very basic. It sounds kind of a silly response, but I think it's like when you're actually really weighing these things and what someone would be going through, it does pick up. It somehow translates. It just really does. And I think it works well in this film because he goes back and forth so often. And I guess I did too while I was doing it. Like, you kind of realize stuff a bit later too. Like, even some of the stuff you say, like, it kind of makes you be like, oh God, yeah, I was really kind of torn back then. Like, it's kind of in retrospect, a lot of it, because you're just kind of living it at the time. But that's the joy of it too.
And in the film, obviously, Justin's been very specific about the setting of the film as well. And so for you, in playing a character where he walks into the grocery store and he's going to run into his ex and he's going to run into his kid, and being a police officer and there being people that he really recognizes and knows within the community, as well as details that then brings in, like the dialogue and the dialect and some of the specific inflections that you wanted to find within the dialogue and the way that you worked with a lot of the script in terms of that sense. How did that specificity of location and setting infuse itself into a lot of the character details and the way that you saw him?
Oh, big time. I mean, I did a couple of ride-alongs with a few police officers there and stuff, and you see it is sort of a certain kind of time and place, and that thing of like, yeah, you do kind of. I come from a very small town, and New Orleans feels small. It's not huge. It's not a giant place, and where I come from, it's kind of like that. And you do kind of know everyone, and in a way, I think what that does for me personally, growing up in Newfoundland, I loved growing up in Newfoundland. I love it dearly to this day. I'm very proud to be from there, try and work there as much as I can. My family's there. However, I remember when I was quite young, when you know everybody so well, there is a fear to change or to step outside of that and say, hey, I'm going to become an actor, when no one does that. No one is an artist. No one. And everyone is trying to be, all your friends are trying to be hockey players like you. And you're like, I think I want to be an actor. Like, it's kind of crazy, right? Because everyone, you know what I mean? It's a small group of people. And when you step out, even when you do that with your friends, you say something totally different, all of a sudden it becomes a bit odd and you feel like an outsider, even if you aren't. And I think like that idea of stepping up, like what we were talking about, and being willing to step up to Denny, say my partner in the film, Emery's character, it's hard. It is hard. And I don't want to sympathize people who do bad things, but I think it's only healthy to try and see the point of view so you can have some peace on it, or try and help change it by seeing the point of view. And I think it comes from that a lot. When you're in a certain community, for almost any community, it's really hard to step outside of that and think something differently when you haven't your whole life. And even if you do think differently, you haven't said anything your whole life because no one wants to be ostracized. No one is interested in that. And I think that plays a big part in it. I thought about that quite a bit.
And then I also wanted to talk about your movie, The Righteous. And, you were talking earlier about how when you create films as well, that you really love to put together that sense of intimacy as well. And there's so many moments within the film in which you're acting in it as well, alongside Henry Czerny, where there's a lot of two-hander scenes between the two of you. And so how did that really allow both of you to really just lean into finding this real truthful intimacy between your two characters in a lot of the scenes and a lot of the moments?
Well, a lot of it was the writing, really, because I knew, I was like, these are really long scenes, and I didn't make them long for any other reason that they naturally seemed to go in that direction. And I think it was really like, I love films and I love stories, like we we're talking about, that are not one way, but also I love it when someone's prodding at someone. There's something interesting about someone trying to get someone to do something. Sexy Beast had a huge influence on me. I saw that when I was about 18, and I remember really. I was already getting into films about 3 or 4 years before that, like heavily. But Sexy Beast, I just love that. It's so simple. I mean, he's just trying to get him to do something. That's all. That's all he's doing. He's just trying to get him to do something. And I like that idea. But if you're going to do that over a long period of time, then every line, every single thing has to mean something different than the last, but with the same motive. And especially when you're dealing with a mysterious character like Aaron's, as the character I play in it, he twists and turns in different directions too. So you don't know what he's going to do or say next or believe. And I find that fascinating because I like movies that make you lean in and they make you a participant. And you're like, I'm trying to figure out what this is. And there are certain films I love. I always say, I said in a lot of interviews, my favorite movie is The Game, the David Fincher film. I just love that movie. But what's interesting about that is that it's one way or the other. It's either a real or it's not. The Game. Like, you know what I mean? It's one thing or the other. But in another way, I'm really drawn to things that it's like, I don't know what it could be. And to me, that's the difference between suspense and dread. Suspense to me is, when's it going to happen? Oh my God, the bomb's going to go off or whatever. And dread is there a bomb? Is it something else? Is it the apocalypse? Like, what is the thing that I'm scared of? And that's what I was trying to go for in that film and in those long scenes. But at the same time, I read a lot of scripts and I see certain things that I'm not interested in that glaze over the human issues within those things. You're trying to push something forward. There's something really interesting to me when a scene goes on a bit longer, because I'm like, whoa, like this, because you expect it to end earlier. You expect every scene to be about 2.5, 3 minutes, like just generally like a dialogue scene, because they normally are. So when you start pushing beyond that, the audience starts to question a little bit what's going on. And then you pull them in a slightly other direction, make it very emotional. And now they're, wait, what's going on now? So you're kind of playing with them in a way, and I love that in film. And I think when you're doing that, though, the most important thing for me as a writer is that there's an emotional undercurrent. It can't just be, do this now, please, and the person's like, no, come on, do it. I'll kill you if you don't. Oh, come on. Like, it needs to be, no, there's a history and there's an emotional complexity to it, so that there's something that you're connected to. Kind of like, if I'm going to reference Sexy Beast. I mean, he loves his wife, and that's what it is. He's like, I don't want to potentially lose my wife and this life, this heaven that we've created. And The Righteous is sort of similar in that way. Henry's character is just hiding something, and that's what he's afraid of. And we know he's hiding something, but we just don't know what it is.
And also, when you're telling a story where you're intentionally trying to elicit some sort of build and tension with the audience in watching it, there's a real delicacy and nuance required to it, particularly for the intimacy of the way that you're telling the story like this. And to your point of your character and how you don't know what he's going to do. And there's a lot of different ways in which you approach taking the audience off kilter in completely different ways. And sometimes it's your performance, sometimes it's a character moment, sometimes it's a reveal in dialogue, sometimes it's something like the camera angle where the two of them are sitting outside, and there's, you know, the branches of the tree are stretching out in front of the angle, so it's not a traditional angle, so it makes you feel a little bit off kilter in watching the scene and how you're listening to these characters. And I imagine that a lot of it also played into the post-production and editing of the film. So particularly in terms of trying to elicit that build of tension in the audience, how were you always cognizantly thinking about all of the different details and ways that you could pull that into each individual moment to have that build to that crescendo?
What a wonderfully articulated question, by the way. It's just really nicely put. Thank you. I think, like when you're watching a film and someone's going to say a similar thing like The Righteous, right? And you know it's heading towards something that's mysterious and what's going on, who's this guy, and I feel uneased and all that kind of stuff. Unless there's a reason for that, then I don't think it exists, because then you're doing it for a genre reason. You're doing it because it's a horror movie. That's what we're supposed to do. For me, this movie is his subconscious. So subconscious is murky and it's threatening. So every piece of music, every shot, that branch coming out, it's like this beautiful tree, this swing set, yet there's something unnatural coming out of it that you haven't taken down. You haven't chainsawed off yet. Like you haven't dealt with. So like everything in the film is an emotional response to, or not an emotional continuation of what Frederick is going through on a subconscious level, so that it's not, we're not going in that direction. That's why the film changes kind of genre here and there. It's like a drama, that's sort of a mystery, sort of a horror. It's all these things because that's what he's going through. So everything that happens is just he's almost going through a spiritual odyssey in a way that he's unaware of. And I always thought of the movie almost as a dream, like it's a nightmare. It's actually a nightmare, and we play with dreams a lot in the film, obviously, and waking up and all that kind of stuff. Because I also believe too, the dreams are just as real as your waking life. Because if I go to bed and I have a dream about, like, you know, my sister passing away, I'm going to call her first thing when I wake up. Like, that's what we all do. So it's real. The emotion is real. And in fact, it sticks with you for days sometimes. And so that's what Frederick is going through. So all of the unease and the mystery and that kind of stuff is just completely emotionally based. And to me, that's interesting, because then, sure, aesthetically and kind of for an audience reaction, you're getting them kind of unease and stuff, which I love playing with, like I was talking about, like Michael Haneke does so well, or David Lynch. But at the same time, we're telling an emotional story. It always has to be emotional. And I think that's probably, I care about that because I'm an actor, because I never want to play for tricks. You know what I mean? Like, we got him. Like, it's like, no, there's, you know, like, why is this happening? I mean, that's what actors normally say. Why? To the point of no return.
Well, these two projects could not be more different, but I love that there's such internal complexity in the journeys with both of them, and just want to thank you for talking so in depth about both of these great projects and films. And thank you so much, Mark.
Thank you. Really nice meeting you. I appreciate it.